The rain tapped a soft, irregular rhythm against the high window of the oncology ward, a sound Dr. Elias Thorne had long stopped hearing. He moved down the hallway, his white coat a stark flag of surrender in the dim evening light. It wasn't the hour that made it dim. It was the weight. A weight that had settled in his chest over the past 6 months, dense and cold, like a stone sinking in still water. He was a man built for solving puzzles. From a young age, he saw the human body as the most fascinating, complex machine, and medicine was the toolkit to fix it. He loved the logic of it. This symptom plus the test result equals this diagnosis, leading to that treatment. For years, it worked. He felt the quiet thrill of a battle won, the profound gratitude in a family's eyes. But here, on the 7th floor, the puzzles had changed. The pieces were brittle, and no matter how carefully he arranged them, the picture that kept emerging was one of loss. He paused at the nurse's station, his eyes skimming the board. Each room number was a story, most of them in their final chapters. Room 304, the young mother with the relentless leukemia, her husband's face a permanent mask of tired fear. Room 311, the old fisherman with liver cancer, who still talked about the sea as if he could smell it. And room 307. He didn't need to look at the notes for 307. The image of the man in the bed, his breath a shallow, rasping struggle, was etched behind his own eyes. "Long day, doctor?" A voice asked. It was Helen, a charge nurse, who had seen more doctors come and go than she could count. Her eyes, kind but unflinching, saw everything. "Aren't they all?" Elias replied, his voice softer than he intended. He tried for a smile, but it felt thin, like paper. "You can't carry them all, you know," Helen said, not for the first time. "You do what you can. Then you go home." Home. The word felt hollow. Home was a quiet apartment where the silence was louder than any hospital beep. Home was where he replayed the day's conversations, the scans, the failed treatments, on a loop. Lately, the line between the hospital and home had blurred into one long gray corridor of doubt. He pushed off from the station and continued his final rounds. This was the hardest part. Not the morning reviews or the tense family meetings, but these quiet evening visits. This was when the brave faces came off, when the pain was too tired to hide, when the loneliness of illness filled the rooms like a second patient. In room 304, he adjusted a drip rate, his hand gentle on the pump. The young woman was sleeping, her husband asleep in the chair beside her, his hand clutching hers. Elias watched the steady, slow rise and fall of her chest under the blanket. A small victory, for now, but he knew the numbers. He'd seen the latest blood work. The victory was temporary, a fragile ceasefire. He moved on, the stone in his chest growing heavier. The door to room 307 was slightly ajar. Elias stood before it for a moment, gathering himself. He needed to be the doctor here, not the tired man. He needed to be clinical, precise, kind but firm. He pushed the door open. The room was lit by the faint glow of the monitors and the last gray light from the window. The man in the bed, Mr. Maurice Thorne, a coincidence of names that had offered a weak smile once, but now just felt cruel, was propped up on pillows. The oxygen tube under his nose hissed its constant vital song. Pulmonary fibrosis. The doctor's mind supplied the facts automatically. A disease where the lungs turned to scar tissue, stiff and useless, like concrete slowly setting in the chest. There was no cure. Treatment was about managing, slowing, buying time. For Maurice, the time was nearly gone. Elias approached the bed. "Evening," he said, his voice carefully modulated to be both warm and professional. Eris turned his head slowly. His face was all sharp angles, skin stretched thin over bone, but his eyes were alive, a clear, watery blue that seemed to see more than just the room. He gave a small, slow nod, saving his breath. "How are we feeling today?" Elias asked, lifting the chart from the end of the bed, though he already knew what it said. Aris took a few shallow, quick breaths, like a bird panting. "Like I'm breathing through a straw." "Filled with cotton," he whispered, each word a careful expedition. Elias nodded, placing the chart back. He listened to Aris's chest with his stethoscope. The sound a horrible crackling, like cellophane being crumpled deep inside. It was worse than yesterday. He'd seen the X-rays that morning. The white, cobweb-like scarring had advanced, claiming more of the precious black space that should be air. He finished his exam and stood back. This was the moment. He had rehearsed it in his head. Asterisk, Mr. Thorne, I think we need to talk about focusing on your comfort. The treatments we have are becoming more burdensome than beneficial. We should consider moving to hospice care. Asterisk, they were the right words, the responsible words. The words of a doctor who accepted the limits of his science. But as he opened his mouth, his gaze drifted from the patient to the small television mounted on the wall. It was on, volume low. A man in a tuxedo was playing a grand piano on a stage, his hands flying over the keys in a blur. The sound was tinny through the cheap speaker, but a melody filtered through something sad and beautiful and full of longing. Aris's eyes were fixed on the screen. His right hand, lying on the blanket, twitched. His thin fingers curled slightly, then stretched, as if tracing the shape of an invisible key. The expression on his face wasn't one of pain or fear. It was one of pure, aching recognition. Elias closed his mouth. The rehearsed speech evaporated. He just watched the piece on the TV ended. The audience clapped. Aris let out a long, slow breath that turned into a cough. When it subsided, he looked back at Elias, the ghost of a smile on his lips. Chopin's Nocturne, in E-flat major, Aris whispered. Opus 9, number 2. You know it? Elias asked, surprised. Aris's eyes went distant. I tuned pianos for 42 years. Concert halls, recording studios. Even once for a famous jazz musician. He paused, gathering air in memory. You learn to listen, not just to the note, but to the space around it, the breath of the wood. He looked at his own hands, now still on the blanket. I could feel a perfect note in my fingers, in my teeth. He was silent for a moment, the hiss of the oxygen the only sound. Then he turned those bright blue eyes directly on Elias. The clinical distance the doctor had been clinging to shattered. Doctor, Aris whispered, the words costing him dearly. I have made my peace with the air leaving. He gestured weakly to the tubes and machines around him. This is all. Just noise now. He looked back at the dark TV screen and out the window at the deepening twilight. His voice dropped even. Lower, but it was clear. Each word a deliberate, precious pebble dropped into a still pool. But I miss the music. Is there any way? He swallowed with difficulty. Could I hear a real piano one last time? Not from a box, a real one. To feel it? The question hung in the sterile air. It was absurd. It was impossible. It was a request for a miracle that had nothing to do with blood counts or lung capacity. Every practical, exhausted bone in Elias's body screamed to say no, to gently explain that it was too difficult, that he was too sick, that the hospital didn't have such things. He looked at Aris. He saw the man, not just the disease. He saw the lifetime of listening, of creating perfect sound, now trapped in a body that couldn't even draw a full breath. The stone of despair in his own chest cracked just a little, and through that crack something else bled in. Not hope, not yet, but purpose. A simple human purpose. Elias Thorne, the doctor who was about to give up, found himself leaning forward. He didn't offer a sympathetic smile or a pat on the shoulder. He met Arise's gaze and gave a single firm nod. "I'll see what I can do," he said, and for the first time in months, he meant it. The words, "I'll see what I can do," echoed in the quiet hallway long after Dr. Elias Thorne left. Room 307. They felt strange in his mouth, like a language he hadn't spoken in years. For so long, his promises had been careful, measured, wrapped in the soft padding of medical uncertainty. "We'll try this new medication and see how you respond. Or the scan will give us more information." This was different. This was a direct, simple request for something that had no place on a hospital chart. A piano dot back at the nurse's station. He felt a jittery energy under his skin. He pulled up the hospital's inventory system on the old computer, the fan whirring loudly. He typed "piano" into the search bar. The result blinked back. No items found. He tried keyboard, musical instrument, even organ. Nothing. Of course, there was nothing. This was a place of scanners and syringes, not sonatas. Helen glanced over from where she was counting pills. "You're tapping your foot, doctor." "That's new." Elias stopped, unaware he'd been doing it. "I need to find a piano," he said. The statement sounding ridiculous out loud. Helen didn't laugh. She just tilted her head, considering him. "The old chapel?" she said after a moment. "The chapel? It was decommissioned years ago. It's a storage room for broken furniture." "Exactly," Helen said. "And before it was a storage room, it was a chapel. And before this place was all steel and glass, it was smaller. Kinder, maybe. I think there was a piano. An upright. They wouldn't have thrown something like that away. They'd have shoved it in a corner. It was the thinnest of leads, but it was a direction." Elias felt that strange energy focus into a beam. Where? Basement. Sublevel 2. The maze down there. You'll need Leo for maintenance. He knows every brick in this place. Finding Leo took an hour. The maintenance man was in a boiler room, elbow deep in a piping repair. He was a big man with gentle hands, covered in faint scars and grease stains. Elias explained what he needed, the words tumbling out in a rush. Leo listened patiently, wiping his hands on a rag. He didn't ask why. He just nodded slowly. "The old chapel piano. Yeah, it's down there. Hasn't made a sound in 15 years, maybe more. It's not in good shape, Doc. Mice might have had a go at the felt. I just need it to make noise," Elias said. "For a patient." Leo met his eyes, and something passed between them, an understanding that bypassed all the usual hospital paperwork. "For a patient," Leo repeated. "All right. Let me finish this seal, and I'll meet you at the service elevator in 20. Bring a good flashlight. The lights down there are moody." The descent in the rattling service elevator felt like going back in time. The clean, bright halls of the upper floors gave way to concrete and exposed pipes. The air grew cooler, smelling of dust and damp concrete. Sublevel 2 was a labyrinth of shadows, lit by occasional bare bulbs that cast more gloom than light. Leo was waiting, holding 2 heavy-duty flashlights. He handed one to Elias. "Stay close. It's easy to get turned around." They walked through corridors lined with old filing cabinets, broken gurneys from another era, stacks of yellowed patient chairs with torn vinyl seats. The beam of Elias's flashlight danced over forgotten things. It felt less like a hospital basement and more like a memory graveyard. "Here," Leo said, stopping before a set of wide wooden doors, their once polished surface now scratched and dull. A faded, hand-painted sign still read chapel in peeling gold letters. Leo shouldered one door open. It groaned in protest. The flashlight beams cut into the darkness, revealing a large, high-ceilinged room. It wasn't full of broken furniture, as Elias had imagined. It was a frozen moment. Pews were still arranged in rows, covered in thick white dust sheets like sleeping ghosts. A simple wooden lectern stood at the front. And there, in the corner, pushed against a stained glass window that was now bricked over from the outside, was the piano dot. It was an upright, made of dark wood that had gone dull with neglect. One of its front legs was slightly shorter, making it tilt like a ship listing to port. Elias walked over, his footsteps loud in the hollow silence. He set his flashlight down and lifted the fallboard, the cover for the keys. The keys were not bright white and black, but a uniform ivory yellow, like old teeth. Several had cracks. He pressed middle C. The sound that came out was a dull, flat thunk. No resonance, no ring. It was the sound of a dead thing. His heart, which had been beating with a hopeful rhythm, sank. He pressed a few more keys. Some were sticky and didn't come back up. Others made a faint tinny ping. It was worse than he could have imagined. This wasn't an instrument. It was a coffin for music. Told you, Leo said softly, not unkindly. The damp gets into the wood. Strings are probably rusted through. It's a shame. Elias stared at the broken machine. Arisa's face, with that look of pure longing, flashed in his mind. To feel it, he had promised. He had said he would see what he could do, and this was what he could do. A lump of useless, silent wood. The heavy stone of despair, which had cracked slightly upstairs, felt like it was reforming, heavier than ever. He'd been a fool to think he could fight the relentless, gray reality of this place with something as fragile as a song. He was about to close the lid, to admit defeat when his flashlight beam, lying on the floor, caught something. Carved into the wood on the side of the piano, near the leg, was a series of small, neat marks. He bent down, brushing away the dust. They were notches. 5 of them. And beside them, in faint pencil, almost worn away, were words. He squinted. Asterisk tuned by. And then a signature, faded into a blur. A tuner. Someone else, years ago, had cared for this machine. Someone had made those notches, a record of their work. This object wasn't always a ghost. It had a history. It had been alive. Leo saw him looking. Probably the tuner's marks. My granddad was a carpenter. He'd mark his tools like that. A point of pride. Elias stood up. He looked at the piano, then at Leo. Can we get it upstairs? Leo blinked. Doc, you heard it. It's a wreck. It won't make music. I know, Elias said. His voice was quiet but firm now. The jittery energy was gone, replaced by a calm resolve. But he didn't ask for a concert. He asked for a real piano. This is real. And he's a tuner. Maybe. Maybe he doesn't need to hear it play. Maybe he just needs to meet it. Leo was silent for a long moment, looking from the doctor's determined face to the broken piano. He scratched his chin. It's going to be a beast to move. Those old uprights are all solid wood and iron, heavy as sin. We can use a portable bed mover, the kind with wheels. We can take the service elevator up to the ground floor. There's that little atrium garden, the one they never use because it's too far from the wards. It has a glass roof. The sun comes in the afternoons. A slow smile spread across Leo's face. It was the smile of a man who spent his days fixing leaks and unclogging drains, who understood the profound value of a practical solution. The quiet atrium. Yeah, no one's there after 3. It's a good spot. He nodded, the decision made. All right, doctor. Let's give this old girl one last trip into the light. The next 2 hours were a battle of physics and willpower. Getting the piano onto the wheeled transporter was a feat of strength and leverage. with Leo directing and Elias straining alongside him. They wrapped it in moving blankets, its tilted leg wobbling precariously. The journey through the basement corridors was a slow, careful shuffle, around corners and through narrow doorways. The service elevator groaned ominously with the weight, but they did it. They wheeled it into the quiet atrium, a small tiled space with a few benches and a glass ceiling. The late afternoon sun was slicing through, full of dancing dust motes. It was warm. It was alive. They positioned the piano carefully, its back to a plain wall. Leo found a few folded magazines and expertly shimmed the short leg until the piano stood almost level. They pulled off the blanket's dot in the sunlight. The piano didn't look less broken. It looked honest. The cracks in the wood, the yellowed keys, the layer of dust, it all told its story. Elias looked at it, breathing heavily from the effort. He felt tired, but it was a clean tiredness. He hadn't written a prescription or ordered a test. He had moved a heavy object for a reason. It felt profoundly, stupidly good. Leo stood next to him, hands on his hips. Well, there she is. He reached out and plinked a high note. It was still a sad, sour sound. He grimaced. Still terrible. But Elias was looking at the piano with new eyes. He wasn't seeing a failed solution anymore. He was seeing a possibility. A connection point. No, Elias said, a real faint smile touching his own lips for the first time in what felt like years. It's not terrible, Leo. He turned to the maintenance man. It's perfectly out of tune. Leo looked confused for a second, then his expression cleared. He let out a soft chuckle. A warm sound in the sunny room. Yeah, I suppose it is. For a tuner, that might be the best kind of invitation. The stone in Elias's chest was gone. In its place was a nervous, hopeful flutter. He had a piano. Now, he just had to bring the musician. The next morning, the hospital felt different to Dr. Elias Thorne. It wasn't the place itself, the same smells, the same sounds, the same tired light in the hallways. It was him. For months, he had walked these corridors feeling like a ghost. A spectator to a slow-motion disaster, he was powerless to stop. Today, he felt solid. He had a mission, and it had nothing to do with white blood cell counts or oxygen saturation levels. It was about moving a person, not just treating a patient. He went to see Helen first. She was at the nurse's station, her glasses perched on the end of her nose as she reviewed a chart. She looked up as he approached. You have a look about you, she said, not asking a question. I need to move a patient to the quiet atrium this afternoon, Elias said, keeping his voice low. Room 307. It's important. Helen studied his face. She saw the determination there, a light in his eyes that had been missing for a long time. She didn't ask for the official reason, the clinical justification. She simply nodded. It's against protocol. He's on high-flow oxygen, portable monitor. It's a risk, I know. But it's important, she repeated, echoing his words. She closed the chart with a soft snap. All right. I'll make sure we have a portable tank that's full, and the portable monitor with the longest battery. We'll do it at 2. Slow and careful. I'll have my best orderly help. But you're supervising, Doctor. Every step. Thank you, Helen. Don't thank me yet, she said, but her mouth softened at the corners. Get through the morning. The morning rounds were a test of his new focus. In every room, he still saw the illness, the fear, the struggle. But now, alongside it, he found himself noticing other things. The get-well-soon cards taped to a wall. The family photo on a bedside table. The well-thumbed paperback novel. These were the anchors, the things that reminded people who they were before the sickness came. He had stopped seeing them for a while. Today, they were all he could see. When he finally entered room 307, his heart was beating a little faster. Aris was awake, staring at the ceiling. The television was off. "Good morning," Elias said. Aris turned his head slowly. The blue of his eyes seemed paler today, the effort of living more apparent in every shallow breath. But there was a question in them. UNASKED. Elias pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down. He didn't pick up the chart. "I found the piano," he said simply. Aris's entire being seemed to shift. It wasn't a big movement. His frail body didn't allow for that. But a tension drained from his shoulders. His eyes widened, just a fraction, and fixed on Elias with an intensity that was almost physical. "It's in the old quiet atrium, the one with the glass roof." Elias continued, his voice calm and matter-of-fact. "It's an upright. It's been in storage for years. It's seen better days. Leo, from maintenance, says it's probably been 15 years since it made anything like proper music." Aris listened, not blinking, absorbing every word. "We moved it up yesterday. It's terribly out of tune. Some of the keys stick. One of the legs is a bit wobbly." Elias leaned forward slightly. "But it's real. Solid wood. Real strings, even if they're rusty. You can smell it, old wood and dust." A single tear escaped from the corner of Aris's eye and traced a slow path down his temple into the pillow. He didn't seem to notice. He took a few quick, bird-like breaths. "Real," he whispered, the word a sigh of relief. "I'd like to take you to see it this afternoon," Elias said. "If you feel up to it. We'll bring your oxygen. We'll go very slowly. It's a short trip." Aris's hand, a bundle of thin bones and translucent skin, moved on the blanket. His fingers curled and uncurled. He gave the smallest, most definitive nod. "Yes, all right then," Elias said, standing up. "We'll come for you at 2. The preparation felt like planning a delicate military operation. At 1:30, Helen and a steady, quiet orderly named Ben arrived with a wheelchair, specially fitted with a pole for the oxygen tank and clamps for the portable monitor. They worked with a gentle, efficient grace, transferring the tubes and wires, helping Aris from the bed into the chair, tucking a blanket around his legs. Aris was frighteningly light. A collection of whispers held together by Will. Helen checked the monitor. She met Elias's eyes and gave a short professional nod. "Vitals are stable. He's as ready as he can be. Ben, you take the chair. Doctor, you manage the oxygen line. Don't let it snag. I'll walk ahead and make sure the path is clear." And so they set off. It was a small, solemn procession leaving the oncology ward. The journey was only a few hundred feet, but it was a world away. They moved past the pharmacy, past the closed door of a physical therapy room, around a corner. The noise of the main ward faded, replaced by the soft whir of the wheelchair wheels and the rhythmic hiss of the oxygen. Aris didn't look at the walls they passed. His head was tilted back against the chair, his eyes half closed. He was preserving every bit of his strength. Finally, Helen pushed open the door to the quiet atrium. The wall of sunlight and warmth that hit them was a shock after the cool, artificial light of the halls. The glass ceiling turned the space into a giant lantern. Dust motes swirled in the golden beams like tiny, excited stars. And there it was. The piano sat in a patch of sunlight, looking both shabby and magnificent. The afternoon light revealed every scratch, every water stain on its dark wood, but it also made the old grain glow. Ben pushed the chair carefully into the center of the room. Elias knelt and locked the wheels. He and Helen stepped back, giving space. For a long moment, there was only the sound of the oxygen and the distant, muffled hum of the hospital. Aris simply looked. His gaze traveled over the piano slowly, from its scuffed top to its unbalanced legs, to the yellowed keys visible under the open lid. It was the look of a man coming home to a house weathered by a long storm. Then, with a strength that seemed to come from somewhere beyond his lungs, he raised a trembling hand and pointed a thin finger towards the piano bench. Elias understood. He looked at Ben, and together they carefully helped Aris stand. It was a fragile operation. Ben supported most of his weight, while Elias guided his steps, the oxygen tank rolling beside them. 2 shuffling steps, then 3. The distance from the wheelchair to the piano bench was less than 5 feet, but it felt like a marathon. Finally, they lowered him onto the bench. He was breathing hard now, the monitor giving a soft, warning chime at his elevated heart rate. Helen took a step forward, a nurse's concern on her face. Elias held up a hand, stopping her. He watched Aris. Aris was not looking at them, not at the monitor, not at the sunlight. He was looking at the keys. He placed his hands on his knees, gathering himself. The panic in his breathing slowly began to ease. He was focusing, the way a craftsman focuses before beginning a delicate task. Slowly, so slowly it was almost painful to watch, he raised his right hand. It hovered over the keys, shaking. Then he let it fall, not to play a chord, but to press a single key. The note was for G above middle C dot. The sound that came out was awful. It was flat, dead, and slightly buzzy, like a mallet hitting a rusted pipe. Aris didn't flinch. He tilted his head, his ear turning towards the piano. He pressed the key again. Thunk. He listened. He pressed it a 3rd time, holding it down, his head cocked, his eyes seeing nothing in the room, seeing only the sound. And something remarkable happened. The trembling in his hands stopped. The shaking was replaced by a sudden, surprising steadiness. The muscles in his thin forearm shifted under his papery skin. The craftsman's hands remembered. He moved his hand to the next key, and the next, playing single notes in a slow, random sequence. Each one sounded terrible to Elias's ears, sour, dull, or silent. But Aris was not hearing the music. He was diagnosing the machine. He was listening to the potential of the note, hearing the ghost of what it should be inside the reality of what it was. He played an F that stuck down. Gently, he used his other hand to work it free. He found a D that didn't sound at all. He nodded to himself, as if confirming a suspicion. He looked over his shoulder at Leo, who had appeared in the doorway, watching silently. Aris's voice was a thread of sound, but it was clear. Do you have a tuning wrench? And a felt mute? Leo's eyebrows shot up. He nodded once, turned, and was gone. He returned 2 minutes later with a small, worn leather roll. He unrolled it on the top of the piano. Inside were simple, well-used tools. A tuning hammer, a few mutes, a strip of red felt. Aris looked at the tools. He looked at the broken piano. And for the first time since Elias had met him, he smiled. It was a full, true smile that reached his tired eyes and transformed his face. It was the smile of a man who had just been handed back his purpose. He picked up the wrench, his fingers curling around the familiar handle with a sense of rightness. He looked at the exposed pins inside the piano, then back at the keys. "All right," Aris whispered, not to anyone in the room, but to the instrument itself. "Let's see what we can do." For a long moment, there was only the sound of the oxygen and the soft, rasping rhythm of Aris's breath. He sat before the broken piano, the tuning wrench resting in his palm as if it were an extension of his own bones. The others in the room, the doctor, the nurse, the orderly, the maintenance man, held perfectly still. They were no longer hospital staff. They were witnesses. Aris closed his eyes. He took 3 short, careful breaths. When he opened them again, He was not in a sunlit hospital atrium. He was in a workshop, a concert hall, a living room, any place where a piano needed his care. The tubes, the wheelchair, the silent monitor, all of it faded into a distant hum. There was only the machine and the man. He leaned forward, his posture changing. The terrible fragility was still there, but it was now braced by an undeniable authority. He placed the red felt newt on one of the strings inside the piano's belly, a technique to isolate a single note. His left hand, trembling just moments before, pressed a key down softly. With his right, he fitted the tuning wrench onto the corresponding pin. He turned the wrench just a fraction of an inch. The note sounded. It was a dull, unresonant ping. He turned the wrench the other way, an even smaller movement. He listened, his head tilted so his ear was almost touching the strings. He did it again, and again, but it was painstaking work. Each adjustment was microscopic. He wasn't trying to make the piano perfect. That was impossible. The strings were old, the soundboard was dry, the pins were loose in their block of aged wood. He was doing something simpler, and in its own way, more profound. He was having a conversation with it. He would play a note, listen to its sour, wobbly depth, then gently nudge the pin, asking a question. He'd play it again, listening for the answer in the new vibration. His face was a map of deep concentration. A furrow appeared between his brows. His lips moved silently, as if he were counting or talking to the wire. Sometimes he would stop, take a few rapid, shallow breaths, and wait for the strength to return to his arms. No one moved to help him. They understood, instinctively, that this was a task he had to complete alone. Elias watched, mesmerized. He had seen surgeries, complex procedures where a life hung in the balance. This was different. This was a kind of surgery, too, but on time itself. Aris was reaching back through 15 years of neglect and silencing dust, trying to find the true voice that was still buried somewhere inside. The doctor felt a lump form in his throat. This was not a patient succumbing to an illness. This was a man utterly, triumphantly alive in his work. After nearly 20 minutes, Aris had only tuned a handful of notes in the middle of the keyboard. He was drenched in a light sweat. His breathing was more labored, the monitor emitting a soft, regular beep that spoke of a heart working too hard. Helen shifted on her feet, her professional instincts screaming to intervene, to get him back to bed. She looked at Elias, her eyes full of warning. Elias met her gaze and gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of his head. Not yet. Aris seemed to sense the silent exchange. He paused, setting the wrench down on the felt. He leaned back, his eyes closed, gathering himself. The struggle for air was visible in the tight pull of his shoulders. For a terrifying second, Elias thought he might collapse. Then Aris's eyes opened. They were brighter now, shining with a wet, fierce light. He looked not at the people, but at Leo. His voice was a dry leaf rustle. The short leg. The front left. Leo blinked, then quickly knelt by the piano. He saw the wobble. Yes, sir. A piece of cardboard, folded, under it. 3 times. Leo didn't question it. He pulled a flattened box from a recycling bin in the corner, tore a piece, and folded it into a thick, firm wedge. He slid it carefully under the listing leg. The piano settled, the wobble ceasing. It was now a solid 4-square presence in the room. Aris gave a single nod of satisfaction. He turned back to the keys. This time, he didn't pick up the wrench. He simply placed his fingers on the white keys, spanning an octave. He took a deep, shuddering breath that hitched halfway. And then he played dot. It wasn't a song. It was a chord. A C major chord, the simplest, most fundamental building block in music. He pressed the keys down slowly, pouring the last of his physical strength into the action. The sound that filled the atrium was not beautiful, not in any traditional sense. It was slightly off, a hair out of tune, the bass note a little weak, the high note a bit thin. But it was complete. It was a real chord, made by real hammers hitting real strings, vibrating a real soundboard. It rang out in the sunlit space, bold and clear and utterly, unmistakably present. The vibration seemed to travel through the bench, up through Aris's frail body. A tremor went through him, but it wasn't a tremor of weakness. It was a tremor of resonance. He held the chord, letting the sound live and fade out as the last whisper of vibration died away. A profound change came over him. All the tension, the fierce concentration, drained from his body. His shoulders slumped, not in defeat, but in release. His hands fell from the keys into his lap. He sat back, a long, slow sigh escaping his lips, a sigh that didn't end in a cough. He looked at the piano for a long, quiet moment. Then he turned slowly on the bench. His eyes found Elias. The fierce light in them had softened into something warm and peaceful. "There," Aris whispered. The word was full of finality, of a job well done. "Now it can sing." He looked around the room, his gaze touching each person: Helen, Ben, Leo, finally resting again on Elias. A faint, tired, and utterly content smile touched his lips. "Thank you," he breathed. That was all. He had no more strength for words. He simply sat, bathed in the afternoon sun. A man who had just finished the last and most important task of his life. Elias moved then. He and Ben stepped forward, and with infinite care, they helped Aris stand. He was a feather in their arms. They turned him from the piano and guided him the few steps back to the waiting wheelchair. He didn't look back at the instrument. He didn't need to dot. Helen immediately checked the monitor, her fingers gentle on his wrist. She nodded, her face relaxed. The journey had taken its toll, but he was stable. The crisis she had feared hadn't come. Something else had come instead. As Ben unlocked the wheels and prepared to push the chair, Aris's head lolled slightly against the headrest. His eyes were half closed, but they found Elias, who was walking beside him. His hand, resting on the blanket, lifted an inch, the fingers curling just slightly. Elias reached down and took it. The old man's hand was cool and light as a bird's wing. He gave it one gentle squeeze. Aris's fingers pressed back, the faintest, most definite pressure. A message passed between them, clear as the now silent chord in the sun-drenched room. Then the hand went limp, resting again on the blanket. Aris closed his eyes, a look of deep, exhausted peace settling on his face as they wheeled him out of the light and back into the soft, shadowed hallways of the ward. The quiet in the atrium after Aris left was a different kind of quiet. It wasn't empty. It was full. The sunlight still streamed in, but now it felt like it was shining on something that had been completed. The piano sat there, no longer a broken piece of furniture, but a testament. Elias stood beside it, his hand resting on its worn, scarred wood. He could still feel the ghost of that single resonating chord in the air. Helen touched his arm softly. "I'll get him settled. You should take a moment." She and Ben followed the wheelchair out. Leaving Elias alone with Leo. Leo was carefully coiling the oxygen tube that had been left behind. He looked at the piano, then at Elias. "He did something to it," Leo said, not quite a question. "He gave it its voice back," Elias replied. "Or at least a whisper of one." Leo nodded, as if that made perfect sense. He picked up his leather roll of tools, the tuning wrench now lying on top. He left this. "Keep it," Elias said. "A souvenir." Leo pocketed the wrench with a small, respectful smile. "I'll check on the boiler. You know where to find me." He left, his footsteps echoing down the hall. Elias was alone. The weight of the last hour settled on him, but it wasn't the old, crushing weight of despair. It was a heavy, sweet fullness, like the silence after a beautiful piece of music ends. He looked at the piano keys, still slightly depressed from Eris's final chord. He hadn't played since he was a boy. His mother had insisted on lessons, seeing it as a mark of a proper education. He'd hated the rigid practice, the boring scales, the feeling of being trapped on the bench when he could be outside. He'd quit as soon as he was allowed, and never looked back. The language of medicine had replaced the language of music, and he'd told himself it was a more useful, more important tongue. Now, he pulled out the piano bench and sat down. The wood was still warm from Eris's presence. He placed his hands on the keys. They felt foreign, too big, too clumsy. His hands were made for holding scalpels and charting notes, not for creating beauty. He closed his eyes. What could he even play? All that came to mind were fragments, the clumsy beginnings of pieces he'd been forced to learn. Then, from a deep, dusty corner of his memory, a melody surfaced. It was simple. It was the first real piece his teacher had given him after the nursery rhymes. Beethoven's Für Elise. He could remember the feeling of pride when he'd finally played it without a mistake, his mother smiling from the doorway. His right hand hovered. This was foolish. He would butcher it. The piano, even after Eris's work, was still wildly out of tune. It would sound terrible, Dot, but then he heard Eris's whisper in his mind. Now it can sing. Elias pressed down on the first note. It was the E. The note was sour, distinctly flat. He winced, but he continued. The familiar pattern came back to him, his fingers finding the shapes from muscle memory long buried. He played slowly, haltingly. He missed notes. His timing was awkward. The out-of-tune strings made the simple melody sound strange and melancholic, not at all like the bright recording he remembered, but he kept playing. He didn't play for an audience. He played for the empty room. He played for the man who had just left it. He played as a thank you, and as a goodbye, Dot. As he fumbled through the middle section, something shifted. He stopped thinking about the mistakes. He stopped hearing the tune as it was supposed to sound. He started listening to it as it was, a fragile, human sound in a sunlit room. The piano's imperfections made it honest. His own clumsy playing made it real. It wasn't a performance. It was an offering. Dot. He finished the simple piece, the last note fading into the warm air. He sat for a moment, his hands in his lap, breathing steadily. Dot. When he opened his eyes, he saw Helen standing in the doorway. He hadn't heard her return. How long had she been there? Her arms were crossed, but her face was soft. He's asleep, she said quietly, peacefully. His stats are the best they've been in days. It's like he left all his struggle here in this room. Elias nodded, looking at the piano. He finished his work. He did, Helen agreed. She paused. So did you, in a way. Elias stood up, closing the fallboard over the keys with a soft thud. The sound was a full stop. No, he said. I think I just remembered how to start. He walked back to the ward, but he didn't go straight to his office to bury himself in charts. He stopped at room 304, the young mother's room. Her husband was still in the chair, asleep. Elias entered quietly and saw the water pitcher on the table was empty. He picked it up, went to the hydration station in the hall, filled it with fresh cold water and ice, and brought it back, setting it down silently. A small, useless thing, and yet not useless at all. Dot. He passed room 311, the old fisherman. The man was awake, staring at the ceiling. Elias stepped in. You ever tune a piano? He asked, his voice casual. Dot. The old man turned, surprised. A piano? No. but I could tune a ship's radio in a gale. Why? Just wondering, Elias said. Get some rest. Later that night, the call came. It was Helen, her voice steady but gentle on the phone. Aries had passed in his sleep. No struggle, no drama. His heart had simply slowed and then stopped. As quietly as the last vibration of a string, Elias felt the news settle in his chest. There was sadness, a clean, sharp ache. But there was no surprise, and more importantly, there was no guilt. He had not failed. Together, in a strange and perfect way, they had succeeded. The next morning, Elias Thorne put on his white coat. He walked onto the oncology ward, and the weight of it was different. The stone was gone. In its place was understanding, a new kind of strength. He saw the fear in the family's eyes, the pain in the patient's bodies, and he no longer felt like he was drowning in it. He was a man standing on solid ground, holding a lantern. He couldn't stop the night from coming, but he could light a small space within it. He entered his first patient's room. He did all the doctor things, checked the 4, reviewed the numbers, listened to the lungs. But then he paused. He looked at the man in the bed, really looked at him. He saw the photograph of a fishing boat on the bedside table. You have a boat? Elias asked. The patient, tired and in pain, glanced at the photo. A faint light sparked in his eyes. Had sold her when I got sick. Missed the water, though. The smell of it. I bet, Elias said, and he meant it. He wasn't just making conversation. He was listening. He was learning the tune of the person, not just the diagnosis of the disease. It was the first note, and he was ready to listen for the rest. He finished his rounds and found himself walking past the quiet atrium. The door was closed. He knew the piano was still in there. He didn't go in. He didn't need to. The music wasn't in the room anymore. It was in him. It was in the way he listened, in the space he now held for the human stories unfolding in every room. He was a doctor who had been about to give up, and then a patient with a simple, impossible request had taught him how to hear again. Not just with his ears, but with his heart. The healing had been mutual, and the melody, though often sad, would continue. One careful, human note at a time.